Hi, everyone. This is Sachin Patel. Welcome to a very special webinar that myself and my partner, Dr. Jared, are doing today. We're going to be talking about how to reboot your child's brain without the use of labels or drugs. So today, this topic is very near and dear to both of us, and I'm super excited to be sharing this information. It's extremely valuable information. And as people are tuning in, what I would love for each and every one of you to do is just type in the chat box where you're from, so we know where everyone is tuning in from. And I'd also like you to type in not only where you're from, so the city where you're from, or even the country, but I also want you to type in what you'd love for us to talk about today, or what you want to know, what prompted you to join us tonight. So if you could let us know that, that would help us make this an even more special presentation for you. All right, we've got people from Australia, from London, Mississauga, awesome. Arizona, Columbus, Texas, California, amazing. Burlington, awesome. So some locals and some people from halfway around the world. That's awesome. I love the power of technology, the ability that we have to share this powerful information. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. You know, Jared is, I want to introduce him as you guys are typing in where you're from, but you know, Jared's just one of the most humble people I've ever met. I'm very proud of who he's become as a clinician, who he's become as a father, as you'll soon get to learn his story about fatherhood, and who he's become as a friend and really important person in my life. And I'm just glad to be able to share the stage with him today. He's gracing the stages in front of many, many clinicians all over the world, sharing his amazing knowledge that he's acquired, you know, through working in functional medicine. And it's just been remarkable to watch your growth, Jared. So thank you for spending time away from your family to help us share this information with our followers all over the world.
Yeah, no, glad to be here. I mean, and that's why I do it, because I have kids, you know, I have a child. So to me, this is, as we know, both near and dear to all of our hearts. And I saw a lot of people were saying they needed help for ADD and ADHD. And, you know, I just, as you know, I'm a stats guy. I was actually reading the other day by the CDC's own numbers in the US, what they did for like non-autistic, for neurodevelopmental stuff or learning types of behaviors. To make the numbers not seem as bad, in 2015, they quit including the ADD, ADHD children in that column. And the numbers still rose. So that's where this is just becoming more and more prevalent. What used to be very rare sometimes is now becoming the norm, unfortunately. So, you know, that's why we're doing this. And really the focus, and that's why we made the title, How to Reboot Your Child's Brain. Really, we want to try to do this without labels, because that's extremely hard to do for a lot of any type of dysfunction, but especially brain dysfunction. You know, they just keep adding more and more and more labels because they try to find different pigeonholes that they can fit all these children or people into. And unfortunately, sometimes the only line of defense is a drug that can sometimes suppress the function of the brain. And that can be a good thing sometimes, because people do need that help. But that, in my opinion, that shouldn't be the only thing that we're doing for somebody, especially whenever they're children and they have this, you know, this, if we can give somebody a strategy, now we can really change the trajectory. So that's where I like, of course, we want to see children younger and younger when things first start to happen. That's where I hope everyone watching tonight learns some of the things that you can start to learn to pick up, and things that you can just kind of see. Because when you have that kind of good eye, so to speak, things just become easier to spot, and then you can try to figure out again the why. So the why I'm doing this is, and you're doing this, is to really try to change the trajectory of these children's health, because it's a new classification of disease that we're seeing in kids. And it's not really like they're sick. Sometimes they're just hurt metabolically. And I think it's very important for us as kind of the generation raising them to understand that the world that we grew up in chemically is not the world that our children are growing up in. But a brain can heal. And sometimes, you know, children can function for a long, long time and barely get by. And the struggle is real, so to speak. But this was from a girl. When she first came to see me, she was about 20, and ton of fatigue, like all the time. But, you know, she wanted to go to school and do these things. But as you can see, she said it was an actual nightmare just because she couldn't do it. And the harder she tried, the worse it got. So she said the more she focused, the foggier she felt, the more frustrated she would get. But we started to work with her from the ground up. And I just, you know, we love getting emails like this, but she said, thanks to you, I get to experience the school the way it should be, you know, because we want the best for our children. And if we're trying to help them achieve everything they can be in life, sometimes if their brain is just struggling to do something, then that's really going to maybe put them in a downward spiral, so to speak. So it is possible, because before she just assumed that this was going to be the way her life was, you know, people kind of just accept it. And this was one of the report cards that she sent me. And just always, she's into health and fitness, obviously. You can see kind of she's taking a lot of ologies and things like that. But we can see that now she's able to thrive and her brain can just function and school's easy. Now, to kind of preface what we're going to see next, I remember working with this child especially because it was my first autistic patient ever, like ever. So I had helped the grandmother, and the mother was also a patient, and she said, I want you to help my son. And before, he'd never spoken a word, like ever. He merely communicated a lot of grunts, usually what would be considered lashing out. You know, they said he acted, you know, had a lot of behavioral issues, a lot of aggression, hitting, self-harm. But that's, whenever you can't talk, that's just the way you communicate. And I said, sure, you know, I don't really have experience, but we'll do what we do. We'll just start from the ground and work our way up and see what we can get. Because I didn't want to promise her anything that we couldn't deliver, but, you know, what we did promise is we'll do everything we can to just make his body thrive. And a few months later, we actually got this video.
No. No. Yes. Yes. Okay. Okay. Hi. Hi. Say good night. Good night. Diesel. Good night. Go guys. Say sugar. Sugar. Sugar.
Hey there, everyone.
Don't know what that's going on. But anyways, so we can see, and so he was able to start speaking, which to me was just tremendously awesome. One of the things that actually prompted me to start learning a thing called functional neurology, and we'll touch on that a lot later, was actually that, because even though he could speak, he had a thing in that video, it's called echolalia, where they would just recite kind of what they would heard, and the tone would be typically a higher pitch. And so then I thought, I wonder what that means. And, you know, looking back now, as we learn these things, we could see that's a part of the brain called the basal ganglia. And it's important that we learn how to evaluate different aspects of how the brain works, because that's going to show us really where we need to turn our focus. And unfortunately, like I was saying earlier, this is starting to become normal. So 1 out of 5 children are diagnosed with like a mental illness or a learning disability. So that's, I mean, I was at the mall earlier today, and of course there was more than 5 kids there. So, but really what's startling to me is 2 out of 3 children either don't even get a label, which the label isn't always something, but if they're not getting a label, that tells me it's at least not being followed up with. A lot of the things that I hear sometimes is, oh, they'll just grow out of it. And, you know, this excuse might get used for years. I mean, just years. I've heard people, they'll come in when their child's maybe 9 or 10, and they said they were just told they would grow out of it for maybe 3 or 4 years. And, you know, go with your intuition as a parent. Nobody's going to know the behavior of your child better than you. So I always say, you know, go with your gut instinct. But if they don't get that follow-up, then they're at least not trying to address the issues, which can, to me, be a problem. And unfortunately, not only are these numbers increasing, our current system isn't equipped to address the underlying issues. Autism is raising at the same rate of Alzheimer's. And by 2023, so just in a meager 5 years, Alzheimer's is expected to bankrupt our healthcare system. And we have it coming the other way too, from a developmental standpoint, where now brains are having trouble developing in young children. And that's really, again, the why. You know, we want to change the trajectory of the life, of the quality of life, and how a child can contribute and be able to do what they want to do. You know, they're not bad kids. There's nothing wrong with them. They want to be able to do these things too. They just, sometimes the brain in certain areas can't function, and so we can just see that. And to the untrained eye, it just seems like maybe they're making a mistake or they're just not able to. But in reality, that's just, to me, the sign of a brain on fire and a brain that's hurt. And unfortunately, well, not always unfortunately all the time, but we see a lot of medications. They've never really run these like random clinical control placebo trials ever in children the age that they're giving these medications to. So I find that kind of alarming in and of that there is no real hard data to know exactly what's happening, because a 2-year-old's brain is nowhere close to an 18-year-old's brain, like not by any stretch of the imagination. So obviously there can be maybe some unintended consequences of maybe suppressing a certain aspect of how the brain works, especially while it's developing. Just to me, kind of a red flag. And this is where I feel I can make the biggest focus. This was just taken recently at a seminar. So training other doctors is really what I love to do. Not only just working with people and children especially, but again, this wave is kind of coming, and I'm trying to help these clinicians be able to help brace for the impact and do what we can to help as many clinicians and parents and really try to stem this tide. So that way we can avoid a problem before it gets any worse. But, you know, this was about the clinical management of autoimmune diseases, which unfortunately, that's usually not even talked about in the realm of chronic issues with how a child's brain functions. A lot of times there can be an autoimmune component that's just not even being looked at or even thought about, because that kind of just usually flies under the radar. You know, those are the complex cases type things. So if you're watching this, you know, I just hope that we're committed, but we hope that you're committed to finding the best version of your child, committed to getting rid of these labels, because that's all that it is. It's a label. It doesn't describe your child in any sense of that word or any sense or fashion at all. And really committed to the work, because it's day in, it's day out. We have to do these things from a diet and lifestyle standpoint. When we help people with foundational approaches, you know, it's you have to do these things, especially when we start talking about neurological exercises.
Yeah, can I add a few things in?
Yeah,
I just want to summarize, because there's quite a few people that are jumping on the call. So, you know, in the chat, you can certainly type in what you want us to talk about. We've got a a defined presentation that we're going to do. We're going to cover a lot of the things that you're probably tuning in for, but it just helps us guide the conversation in that direction if we need to. A couple things that you said that I wanted to highlight, I wrote them down. One of them was strategies change trajectories. So one of our intentions today is to help you change the trajectory that your children travel down. Our children today don't have the same liberty that we did growing up. Some of you, your grandparents or whatnot, depending on how old you are, you know, our children don't have those same liberties. They're under so much more stress, although they don't have life-threatening stresses like we did in the olden days, like way, way long ago. What they have are biological stresses. They have chemical stresses. They have emotional stresses. They have an onslaught of all these things that are coming at them, things that the human body was never really designed to handle. We were designed to miss a few meals. We were designed to go days without eating. We were designed to endure cold temperatures and hot temperatures, and we are biologically adapted to those type of conditions, and we've eliminated those stressors in our lives. But what we've added are extremely toxic stressors that the body doesn't really have a good handle on. So this day and age, it's not about getting your children healthy. It's also about protecting them. So you have to protect them first from this onslaught that's coming on. And what the beautiful thing about working with children is that when you start at a young age, then small changes now can lead to massive changes down the road, right? So imagine imagine your child as an investment. Imagine them as an investment vehicle. I hope you do, because I invest a lot of energy into my son, because I know that, that time is going to have a return on it. But here's the thing, that investment that you put into their food, into their mindset, into finding out where the deficiencies they might have are, eliminating the toxins that they're exposed to, eliminating the emotions that are toxic to them, reducing the exposure to those things are going to go a long way. The brain of a child is very, very plastic, but it starts to harden at the age of 7. So their worldview starts to harden at the age of 7. So my son is about 7 now. And the cool thing about him is he's shaped up to be just this remarkable young man. But I know I had to do my work at that age. So if you've got children under the age of 7, you can have a significant impact on their worldview and how they look at the world and who they become and their personality. Now, if your children are past 7, you can still have a significant impact in their health as well. But if they're particularly under 7, then you're going to want to pay really, really close attention. And remember who you're watching for. Most of you are watching for your children, the people that are the most important people in the entire world to you. You're watching on their behalf. So make sure you're taking notes. Make sure you're writing things down. Make sure you're not distracted. Close all your other tabs. Like, this could be some of the most important conversation and dialogue that takes place for your child's life. And they can't listen for themselves. So they're listening through you. And it's not just about listening, but it's also about taking action. Because just listening to this conversation is really not going to do much. It's the action that you take that's going to really plant the seed. And Jared mentioned the word "unfortunately" a few times. And what I wanted to remind you guys of is that your "unfortunately's" are somebody else's "fortunately's." Okay, so when your child is sick, that's fortunate for somebody else. When your child can't take care of themselves and they need special attention, that's a benefit to somebody else. So the people that benefit from this process are not necessarily interested in keeping your children healthy. They're not interested in keeping you healthy. So you have to really understand the agenda that's going on over here. Okay, if everyone got healthy, our economy would crumble. So if everyone woke up healthy tomorrow, our entire ecosystem would be completely crumbled to the ground. Okay, the stock market would crash, hospitals would have to shut down, the entire ecosystem would change. So there's no interest from an economic standpoint to keep people healthy. You would think there would be, but there really isn't. Okay, because the robots are going to come and replace a lot of jobs here in the next 10 or 15 years. So a healthy population is not what we need. What we need is a destitute population, because then a destitute population can be enslaved by finances, by poor health, by eating low quality food. So if you don't see that coming, then it's time for a wake-up call. And I know that's probably not why you tuned in for my little soapbox, but I really want to paint the picture of the reality that's coming that a lot of people have to understand. And Jared also mentioned that the rate of Alzheimer's and the rate of autism is increasing at the same pace. So what is that doing to the end caps of our population? Okay, if you're healthy enough to watch this and understand this, count your blessings, because the people who are born this day and age don't have those same liberties, and the people who are dying don't have those same liberties. So make sure you count your blessings on a daily basis and have that gratitude. And Jared also mentioned that there's no studies that are done on young children. Well, guess what? They're being done on the children right now. They're just not being done in the pharmaceutical controlled settings. They're being done on the general population. Okay, so our kids are part of this huge experiment. Okay, nobody would ever volunteer their kids for this experiment, right? But guess what? That's what many people are doing. And it's because they're not given, not because they're bad parents. It's not because they're lazy. It's not because they're not looking for a solution. They don't know where to look. So we're very honored and blessed and very grateful to be able to wake people up and to actually just give them that little nudge that they need to move their health and their trajectory of their entire family and their bloodline in the right direction. Like, we don't take what we do for granted. We don't dismiss the capability that we have to change your life and the life of your every generation to come after this. You know, we're in the business of not getting people healthy, but we're in the business of protecting people from the things that make them unhealthy and then teaching them how to get healthy. So first, you have to protect your family. You have to understand why it's important for our economy for you to be sick. And once you understand that, you start looking at the entire world a little bit differently, and you start realizing who's in it for you and who's in it for themselves. So just something to keep really, really close to your heart and in mind. And keep in mind that, you know, the diagnosis that people, the label that your child is given, or even you might be given, is somebody's opinion. And according to the literature, 38% of the time, the opinion is wrong. The diagnosis is wrong. So don't become somebody else's opinion. Don't let your child become somebody else's opinion. And no single disease develops in isolation. So you have to take a global approach to somebody's health. And that's why this next slide is really going to walk you through what to look for, because it's not, you know, some of the things that you might not be able to connect the dots as a lay person. To the untrained eye, you might not be able to connect the dots. And that's what we're going to help you do today. So if you're super committed, if you're dedicated and devoted to helping raise the next generation in a healthy way, then just type in yes. I want to know who's behind this. Like, I want to know who's ready to rock and go deep and really get passionate about this, because I'm going to get super passionate. Jared's going to get super passionate. We're probably going to ruffle a few feathers. I'm totally okay with that. But we want you to know the truth. We want you to know that we are absolutely committed to doing whatever it takes to disseminate the truth to people. And we're absolutely committed to our patients to get them better. And we will never leave any stone unturned. We can't fix everybody, but we will never leave any stone unturned that's within our capacity and our capability to help you. So thank you. I really appreciate all the yeses. So let's get ready to rock, brother. Let's do this. Let's rock this out.
Yeah. So like I said, you know, usually, well, not usually, but sometimes I'll see children far on the end of the spectrum, but it doesn't always have to be that way. The most common things we see usually are like low energy. And for most kids, believe it or not, low energy translates into poor attention, because the part of the brain that requires the most energy on a cellular level is right up here. What makes your kid, personality-wise. So we see that all the time. A lot of anxiety. That's actually the most common thing for gut issues, other than actually having GI complaints for a gut issue. Right on the heels is anxiety. Moodiness. We can see a lot of that with children. And, you know, to me, that really just speaks of the inability for the brain to control and regulate emotions. You know, we all have that emotion that I thought like, oh, I just want to punch him in the face. But if there isn't kind of a break on that system, then that thought can turn into an action. And then we see a lot of poor, like mood control, impulse control. Like I said, poor focus, that's usually one of the first things that we see. And sometimes when we see low energy up in through here, a child's going to complain of headaches. You know, doing their homework gives them a headache. Reading gives them a headache, because it's like running on an ankle that's sprained. They're hurting it while they're trying to do that. But they got to make the grades. So we have to have them keep basically going to school 8 hours a day and then doing 3 to 4 hours of homework a night. So we have these little 6-year-old, 7-year-old brains trying to work like 11 hours a day, which, like you were talking about earlier, those chronic types of stresses, that's a completely different ballgame for the brain. Because when we start a child in school, if they have these really demanding schedules and we tell them this is just the way it's going to be, that's how their brain develops. It thinks that's just par for the course. And then, as you said, you know, things kind of get solidified by 6 or 7, but a developing brain, it will kind of hardwire certain pathways a little bit more. Gas and bloating is very common. You know, kids are just farting all over the place. So they have constipation and diarrhea. We always, whenever I work with kids, I always have the parents, like, even when their child is old enough to go on their own, say, you really need to look at that stuff. What's the quality? Ask them about it. Make it an open dialogue. You know, don't try to make it a joke. But, you know, things typically start in the GI tract for a lot of kids. And a reflection of skin health is a reflection of gut health, basically. They're kind of a mirror image. So when we see like the red cheeks, they're all over the place. Little kids with acne and eczema and psoriasis. So see them, you know, on their shins and on their arms and elbows and things, creases. So we just start to see a lot of skin things cropping up too. Unfortunately, well, you know, like I said, maybe fortunately for someone else, usually the go-to is just, here's some steroid cream, which when you understand how the process is working, that you know that actually kind of makes it worse in the long term. It might help with the itching and redness, but as far as addressing the underlying issue, you might have just given that a foothold, because you've maybe thinned out you know, like the gut lining, suppressed how the immune system functions. Usually these kids are sick often. They always have a runny nose, or, you know, maybe it takes Jimmy a little bit longer to get over something than the rest of his class. So the other kids got over it way sooner, you know, but it's still lingering around. And, you know, of course, these things go through the schools. I mean, my daughter's in preschool, and it seems like they always have that sign up like every week about hand, foot, mouth or something, you know, bed bugs. But sometimes Addie gets sick, sometimes she doesn't. You know, every kid is designed to get sick. I'm not going to sit over here and act like, oh, my daughter's never had the sniffles. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, the immune system is designed to fight, and it needs practice to do that. But she should be able to recover, and she shouldn't get everything all the time. You know, we want to see that immune system developing and actually growing. Usually we'll see cravings for a lot of foods for kids. Unfortunately, usually it's the worst food for them. That goes with the upset stomach. For the nonverbal kids, I see that a lot. They'll usually maybe hit their stomach or hold their stomach, or they lean onto something. A lot of these reward-seeking type of like activities, so that way they can get some like actual stimulus on their gut to try to help with the pain. Poor sleep patterns all the time. Just they usually have trouble sleeping, and that can be a big windup, you know, because if they're not sleeping, their brain's not recharging, so then it's not getting ready for the next day. So then maybe their ADD will be worse, their moodiness will be worse, a lot of joint aches. You know, we see a lot of, believe it or not, autoimmunity happening to kids at a very alarming rate. And kind of my thinking with that is it's basically, if I owned a tire discounters, I might rotate your tires and change your oil, but I'm just going to go throw nails in the road because I know someone will run over them and have to come back. But we see a lot of how the gut works. We see a lot of joint issues. So we see like juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, or sometimes kids will just complain of pain. You know, they don't want to take their clothes off anymore. Or they don't want to do this, or no, I don't want to play, my legs hurt. You know, I've heard 3-year-olds say, I don't want to play, my legs hurt. And I think that's not normal for a 3-year-old to say that. You know, they have poor performance in school, and sometimes I think schools are getting better adapted to it. But at first I thought maybe the kids just didn't care, they weren't applying themselves. But if you're basing them on a metric of something like memory, regurgitation of facts and information, especially maybe letters and numbers versus like dates or music or something like that, or a visual memory. So that's going to be a little bit different. And so maybe they'll be good at some things, maybe they'll be bad at maybe everything if they just can't focus on anything. Like I said, a runny nose, clearing of their throat too. So, and like I said, you know, that's a short list of things to look for. That's not even some of the neurological stuff other than moodiness. But like I say, be sure to stay till the end, because the goal is to make it simple, help you learn the most effective way on how to recognize what's happening, figure out through the right action steps, like strategically what's going on. And then, of course, we want to address those. So I always tell, and most people when they come in, when parents come in with their kid, they already know how they want it to be. They know their desired state. They're having fun. They're playing. Everybody's laughing, creating memories for the photo album. And it's a good time. But sometimes, unfortunately, the current state, it can be kind of almost nightmarish for both people involved, or everyone involved. You know, it's not like what we know about neurological dysfunction is it affects 7 family members on average, or at least close friends. So 7 other people are affected for every one person that's maybe struggling with this, because of course everybody wants what's best. The aunts, the uncles, the grandparents, the cousins, they all want, you know, maybe the child to be doing the best they can do. So everyone, of course, has a different opinion, you know, how to raise your kid type thing, which that might be a source of stress for some. But usually the current state, when I talk to parents, they say their kid just can't control certain things, or they have to do certain things. And if not, the ability to handle a change is usually very low. So everyone's kind of walking on eggshells for the most part. So we know where we're at and we know where we want to be, but for everybody it's usually different. But how are they going to get there? You know, how are we going to get from the state that we're in to where we want to be where everybody's happy and laughing, and it's maybe not a dreadful time. So my promise to you is after today's webinar, learn the exact process, something that we've done over and over again to help your child's brain, as well as understand it's not your child's fault. I always want to reiterate that, and most parents, I think, believe that. What to look for that can contribute to brain health and disease. Again, these are things that are just swept under the rug. And underlying issues, yeah, the current system, it's just not equipped to handle it. I think we've said that. So, and that's why everyone's on the call, is because you know the current system still has you kind of looking for answers. And then what can you do to give your child the best opportunity? So everybody's different, but I like to start with a few stories so that way people can relate. So autism is right now currently 1 out of 28 males. Pandas pans is something less known but way more common. It's actually 10 times more common than that. And that's a lot of acute neuropsychiatric stuff. So a ton of moodiness. Meltdowns is usually what they're called. So, you know, I want to show you this process from the beginning to the end, how we start with the thought process, so that way we know where we best need to go. And of course, these parents were really desperate to get their boy back. It was always kind of an uphill battle. There were certain things that we talked about in their history that were overlooked, and then we could kind of see these critical stages where, yeah, at this age, after this happened, things were a little bit different, you know. And then he got sick, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then that happened, and then so once we can start to see these timelines, and these are sometimes the things that are shrugged off, like, oh, it's just a cold, you know, maybe throw some antibiotics at it, things like that. But like you said, we don't want to leave these stones unturned, because those are, like, to me, pearls in the desert. When I hear something like that, I think that's it. Now I just have to objectively verify what's happening so I know the process, and then we can actually address it. We did our initial consultation over the video. Parents had an HD cam. There's a lot that we can do actually over the internet. So they recorded the eye movements, and eye movements are a big window into how the brain functions. Anyone that's ever had a concussion, or a child that's played sports and had a concussion, you know, that's kind of one of the first things they're doing, is having them follow a light, seeing how the eyes are working, because that gets us immediate feedback over how the brain is functioning. And it's very non-invasive too. So we did that so that way I could see what's going on. I jokingly tell my parents that you're going to end up being a neurologist by the time that this is over, and that's okay, because again, we want to give people tools. But one of the first things that was really overlooked in this case was the gut-brain connection. And we know that exists. I think everyone on the call knows that exists, but from a diagnosis-driven medical process, pill like this for that approach, that process doesn't occur. Like, there is no gut-brain axis from a diagnosis standpoint. We really don't see that. We don't see, like, depression due to gut inflammation. Like, there's no ICD-10 code for that. There's just depression, and then you just throw SSRIs at it or something. But the gut and brain are in constant communication with each other, and that's why we usually see these things in tandem. And the way they communicate is actually the immune system. So the lymphatics, of course, the nervous system relays all these things, but the lymphatics are, and an immune system is kind of a big signaling. So the gut kind of tells the brain, this is the environment internally, metabolically, that you have. These are your nutrients. This is kind of our disease state. This is basically what's going on. This is the world you have to live in internally. And so that's kind of a big, big thing that we see, especially with the stool testing that we do. Because it's way more sensitive than, like, checking a kid for celiacs or scopes or something like that. So the first overlooked area was the gut. We could see there was norovirus, so that's a virus that can be a problem. There's H. pylori, that's a bad bacteria. So I say, whenever we run this stool test, the analogy I use is, think of it like people have broken into your home. And now we're actually starting to see multiple people have kind of crashed through the window. And of course, if you're sitting there eating dinner and you hear a crash through a window, you're not just going to be very relaxed eating dinner. You're going to start freaking out. So as these infections are gaining a foothold, the immune system is sounding the alarm, and the brain responds accordingly. It starts to react. And that was only the first page. On the second page, we could see some more bacteria. I didn't actually highlight the staph and the strep. but those were there as well. And that was a big kind of, to me, clinical pearl in the history, is after the mom said, yeah, he got strep throat, and then things got really bad after that. And I said, there it is, because, you know, that PANS and PANDAS and things, those are after an infection. That's what triggers them. And these are infections. So we can see there was also some parasites, little single-celled ones, no big worms. But we could see that now there's a minimum of like 7 people that have broken into this home. They're trashing everything. They're very inflammatory and destructive, and they steal food out of the refrigerator. So there's a lot of nutrient competition. And we can see here what's the actual chemical environment of his GI tract. We can see the pancreas isn't working, and he's not a type 2 diabetic that's been eating himself into oblivion for the past 50 years or anything. The pancreas is controlled by the brain. So that gut-brain axis, we can see that his brain is having trouble regulating how do digestive organs work. So that was one of the big steps that we wanted to do with getting the brain talking to the gut again. And we can see that secretory IgA is low. And that's what we know, we would call it immune tolerance. But that's what does the immune system allow to get by before it responds? Because there's a lot of fights breaking out. So the tolerance of handling more fights is extremely, extremely low. So that was a big thing that we want to do. We want to raise the tolerance of how the immune system starts to attack things. And then that very bottom line highlighted, we can see that the bacteria were pulling toxins back into his body after his liver has detoxified it. So then, unfortunately, his liver has to start dealing with things twice. So it just keeps recirculating and recirculating. And those toxins are very damaging for the brain because they stimulate the immune system. And remember, that's how the gut and the brain talk. The brain kind of tries to sense the blood through organs. Another overlooked area were some heavy metals in the brain. After he got his MMR shot, he saw a regression in motor function and speech control. And that's a big thing that we see. Motor function, what we would call gross motor function, a parent would know it as watching their baby crawl and walk and look at their hand and do stuff and pick up. That's what we would call gross motor control. That is a big indicator of other things brewing, because usually the brain starts to develop up through here, and that motor control is a lot of this prefrontal cortex. And they're going to do stuff like try to grab things and try to crawl before they're trying to talk, to have a conversation, to look at someone's body language and be able to ascertain, are they angry, are they upset? So these verbal or nonverbal cues usually go unnoticed by a lot of these kids. But to me, that was a big thing that we saw in his history, was just heavy metals in the brain. And unfortunately, the metals that were overlooked, one of the big ones is aluminum. You know, of course, mercury can be bad, but aluminum hangs out in the brain. It provokes the brain a lot more as far as the immune system is concerned, and a brain on fire just doesn't develop. So we can see aluminum affecting the central nervous system, so the brain and the spinal cord on a molecular level. Like basically from the ground up, aluminum messes with kind of everything, how molecules work, how genes are expressed, how the nucleus of a cell, it's like a typewriter, just building this stuff out. So if his cells aren't working properly, his neurons, we don't expect the brain to be able to develop, especially when we get down to circuit. Those neuronal glial interactions in the bottom left, that's his immune system suppressing the brain growing. That's just how it works. And from a system standpoint, it's just going to accelerate the process. The cops call more cops, so the immune system gets going in the brain, and it alerts more immune cells to start coming to the brain and just start beating the crap out of whatever it's mad at. So we see a very concentrated focus of the immune system. So usually we have to go in and address and actually start actively turning off the immune response in the brain, just so that way we can get the fire out and get these neurons kind of breathing again, just able to catch their breath, able to just function. And of course, we wanted to look at how are his cells functioning, because at the end of the day, that's what we are, is just a clump of different kinds of cells. So this is usually completely overlooked. I've never seen a pediatrician run this. Nothing against pediatricians, but insurance doesn't pay for a pediatrician to run a urinary organic acids for a child with ADHD. Just doesn't happen. It's not on insurance's radar. So, but on this first one, we see his cells are having trouble using fats for energy. The second groups, number 5 and 6, are using carbs for energy. So 2 sources of fuel for his cells can't get into the cell. It's like, so he can't use fuel. And then think of his cells like having a V8, and we can see that a lot of these pistons in his engines aren't going. So we just, from a foundational standpoint, we just want to get cells working again. So that way when we do all these cool, fancy neurological exercises, we're going to see a lot more traction. Because if his cells aren't ready to do this and make energy, and we kind of put our foot to the gas, we can actually damage things more. So you got to do the right thing at the right time. We can see this first line, number 22. His adrenaline and noradrenaline is just going. So again, he's living in a stress response because a lot of people have broken into his home. And with number 25, we can see his brain is a victim of that. And so we can actually see some of these things on paper, and this is messing with how dopamine and serotonin and how neurotransmitters, which is how a lot of how the nervous system communicates, that communication system gets sent awry. And number 28 is showing us that his cell walls aren't too healthy, and the health of a cell wall in the brain determines how well does that cell function. How long can it fire? How long can it focus on a task? Can it fire when it needs to? And can it stop firing when it doesn't need to? One of the things that I'll never forget, we were going to get into it when I talked about his brain region localization for him, but he suffered from a thing called perseveration. His mom told me that he literally one time had to count to over 1,100. He couldn't stop counting even though he wanted to. He was like in tears counting, and he didn't want to because his brain, that part of the brain to stop, just say, don't count, because we would all say that like, oh, just don't count. That seems so simple, right? That part of the brain just didn't work. So for me, again, these are kind of aha, because we start to think, well, the part of the brain, if we know what is the brakes and that's not working, how can we start to fix those brakes? This top oh, go ahead.
So just because I see a lot of questions coming in, and I just want to make sure people understand what we're looking at. So this test is a urinary organic acids test. It's a single sample of urine that's collected from either yourself or your child. I recommend this test annually for every human being on the planet. I just had my results come back, and it's fascinating to understand what's going on inside your body. Now, the reason we're focusing on cells is really important is because every single structure in your body is made up of cells. So what we see here isn't just a deficiency of one group of cells in the body, like the brain cells. It's a deficiency in every cell in the body. So the beautiful thing about this, and I look at this as all opportunity, right? If your lab results come back like this, I don't look at this and cry. I look at this and I see a beautiful opportunity to really optimize somebody's health. Now, this is impacting every organ and every system in this child's body, not just isolated organs or isolated systems where the symptoms might be showing up. So this is important to understand. And the nice thing about these tests, the stool test that we showed you earlier and this test here, is they're non-invasive. So there's no needles, there's no like elaborate things that you have to do. It's just a sample of urine or a sample of stool that needs to be collected, and we can get a very deep understanding of what's going on inside your child. Sometimes behavioral problems are just chemical imbalances that need to be corrected, right? If the child's brain is on fire, they're not going to behave the way you would expect them to behave or the way you want them to behave. I was at the museum the other day, and the kid looked like he was 11, and he bit his dad. Like he literally went up to his dad and bit his dad, and his dad like yelled in the museum gift shop because that's where we were about to leave. And I look around, and like this kid is like just like running around, like jumping all over things, and his dad is just like furious. I'm like, man, I wish I had the link to the webinar today. Could have given it to him. But I know that it's not the parent's fault, it's not the kid's fault, it's the chemistry inside that child. And if nobody's looking there, you're never going to find it. And that's why this type of testing, many of you have probably never seen it. This is like foreign to most of you, I would imagine. But it's very accessible through a functional medicine practitioner. And it's not just getting the testing, because that's a question that comes up often. Oh, can I just get my doctor to do the test? Yeah, of course you can. But what you want to be asking is, who can I get to interpret this test? That's the most important question. People this day and age want to ask, oh, can I get this test? Well, yeah, that doesn't matter. What matters the most is who's interpreting that test for you, because there's over 100 data points that somebody has to then assimilate, and that how they assimilate that information and congeal that information to create a plan for you is based on experience and knowledge and how well versed and how well read the individual is. So what makes Dr. Jared remarkable, and he won't say it himself, but what makes him remarkable is his ability to connect all these dots and to look at these patterns and to read tons and tons of research, which he does, and put all these patterns and research together so that he can formulate the fastest path towards recovery. So it's just absolutely brilliant, and it's hard to appreciate when we put these things on slides. It really is hard for you guys to appreciate, and we almost want to leave these things out because it can overwhelm people, but it's such a fundamental part of what we do. And the beautiful thing about this is you don't just get better behavior, you get better chemistry, you get better biology, you get better physical adaptations, you get better resilience. Like when you restore somebody's cellular function, you just get you develop a superhuman. You develop that person to the fullest of their capabilities in every area of their life. Like we're not just trying to take a child who has outbursts and just numb them. We're trying to turn them into the best version of themselves. And that's a completely different approach, right? If I just want to numb a child, well, there's lots of things I can do to do that. There's lots of herbal things that I can do to just numb a child. But if I want a child to reach their fullest potential and eliminate anything that's obstructing that possibility, then you got to dig deep. You got to look in the stool. You got to look in the urinary organic acids. You got to look in the mitochondria. You got to look at the detoxification pathways. You got to look at the inflammatory pathways. You got to look at the brain chemistry and the gut chemistry. So this is what separates, I feel, us from a lot of other approaches, is we go deep, because the deeper you go, the better the results you can actually create and the longer term results you can create for somebody. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And they can be overwhelming. So that's where whenever we sit down with people, it's like an hour going over these tests. And I always just try to focus on well, how did these markers even get there to begin with? Like when we look at the top, just think of it like his liver can't get rid of things. There's 6 funnels out of the liver, 4 of them are clogged. So the system's backing up, it's just making it a toxic environment. That number 37, if you look closely, it has a greater than UL, which means it was so high, the lab couldn't measure it. It was above the upper limit. And that's the bacteria in the GI tract shutting off his detoxification capacity. Like the bacteria are thriving down there. They've affected how the body works, and they've manipulated it. And we can see that, like 44 down there, those are Lactobacillus acidophilus. Like, so, this kid eating yogurt or something like that would actually be worse. That D-lactate right there is actually damaging to the brain. So one of the worst things that we could have done in this scenario would have just been throw some probiotics down the hatch, because we would have just poured fuel on a fire. And that last one, we see Candida down at the very bottom. But here's where we just see, even here, if the mom and the parents are trying to eat good, and they are in this scenario, we can really see there's just not going to be a lot of traction, because all those little critters down there are just eating very well, and they're shutting off how his body's trying to do these things. And I always tell people what's going on in the GI tract, these infections and things like that, they'll just make you feel bad, but they'll never kill you. So you'll just, or your child, they'll just have like this just nagging problem. It seems to just get worse and worse and worse. And of course, the reason we do this testing is to get a good environment for the cells. Like Dr. Patel was saying, if we can just get cells functioning and doing their job, now we've seen all aspects improve. But here's where we use a thing called the brain region localization form. I got this questionnaire through training, but we can see different parts of the brain that are actually being affected the most. And once we can see the areas that are kind of struggling, this really lets me as a clinician hone in on an exam to figure out, okay, even though we're complaining of these things, is it this area that's a problem? Because the brain is really good at giving illusions. Other parts will try to cover up the deficiency and function as best it can. But we could see trouble with restraint and impulse control, emotional instability. Those things are very, very common for kids, and this is all the front part of the brain. Getting sound or melodies out of heads. Remember, he counted to over 1,100. That's called Perseveration. Like that lamb chop song. This is the song that never, like that just keeps going and going and going. Low attention span and staying focused. Remember, that's a lot of energy production. So we could just see how different parts of the front of the brain in certain regions are hurting. And then, of course, we want to start firing into those pathways to start strengthening the weak part. And then on this was another page, we could see that certain aspects of his cerebellum, that's what we most consider for balance, were having issues. So one side of balance was worse than the other. Part of his exercises, we called it Ninja Warrior training. He would practice balance to be on Ninja Warrior. That's how we got him to do a lot of the things that he needed to do. So we just make fun games out of this that the parents can be part of. And then, of course, there's bonding. You're meeting them in their world too sometimes if a child is kind of on that end of the spectrum. Plus, it's a good memory. I mean, getting in shape, trying to work on balance, doing Ninja Warrior training, that sounds fun to me. And they would do it every day. But, you know, this child, we could see also like a lot of seasickness, disorientation in the environment, and a lot of children we see crowded places causing anxiety. So we wanted to start kind of activating a part of the brain called the vestibular-cerebellar pathway. There's very big, long words in all of this. But that part of the brain, what helps the crowded places not cause anxiety, also calms down, if you look to the right, those autonomics. Tendency for anxiety, easily startled, difficulty relaxing. You know, we see a lot of kids that this is happening. And those last sections, you know, we could see the obsessive compulsive tendencies and constant nervousness and the restless mind. But these last two sections, those are what's called the autonomics, and that's like that supercomputer in the background. And from a neuro standpoint, we clear those things first, so to speak. We want to do the right thing at the right time. So instead of going like straight into the prefrontal cortex, you know, the right dorsolateral, big words that seem fancy and confusing, we want to teach his brain how to relax and how to shut off the stress switch first, more than anything. And then we can go from there, because as we start pushing more into different parts of the brain, we want to make sure those areas can keep up the slack without damaging them. But the outcome, he was doing great, you know, not perfect, but overall so much happier and calmer. Sister pushes his buttons with an eye roll, tone of the voice. Even the mom got it, though. She said even with an autism diagnosis, though, he's picking up on social cues now. And you know, she said that if he was retested for autism today, she doesn't think he'd get the label, and that was only 6 months ago. With him, we were able to get on the ball with things, you know, and that's okay. Sometimes I'll see children that have had troubles for 15, 20 years. You know, the first example, she was in college, but she never told her son the diagnosis because now he didn't identify with that. That was something that her and her husband agreed on, and I agreed on too. Because then they might identify with that label. And of course, she's going to tell him someday, but she just wanted her boy back, you know, and that's where it was a nightmare. You know, he's a great kid. I actually got to meet him. It's probably one of the coolest things. Sometimes I don't get to meet all my patients face to face. I do a lot of these things remotely. So it was nice to be able to see him, you know, but great parents. It was just a bad situation because his body was being tricked. And it was just doing the best it could in the environment that it was in. And so we changed his environment. We got rid of the trickery. We taught his body and his brain how to do things. So that way we could change his trajectory. And the reason was, again, very compliant parents. They're doing the exercises with him day in, day out, every day. Of course, children always want to get better. I don't know any child that doesn't want to get invited to the parties, have the friends that always want to hang out with them, you know, on the playground and things like that. All their friends sit with them at lunch, you know, because unfortunately, a lot of children can pick up on how some of these things might be different from a social aspect, from an emotional aspect, and sometimes kids don't understand too well. But we did the right testing. We didn't just go crazy with a bunch of it. We took the right supplements when we needed to. And again, we did the right neuro exercises, and those are one of the first things that we talked about was we have to just do whatever it takes. That's kind of the quote unquote contract I have with these parents. I'm like, whatever it takes, we're going to have to do it. And there might be kicking and screaming from your child to change, but that's just what it's going to take. And it's worth it in the long term. Another case study, just wanted to give another example. We see a ton of children with impulse control issues. This one was a little bit trickier, because this was a child that should have been potty trained a long time ago that was still soiling himself. So we wanted to, again, start from the bottom. Of course, if there's stool involved, I'm right there. So we could see a parasite, we could see some fungus going on, and that bottom line calprotectin, we could see inflammation. And remember, there's that brain-gut axis. And when we did a different test on him, one that required a little bit of blood, we could see that glutathione is his body's major antioxidant. That's just going to keep things clean, because we got to clean up inside whatever happens. And this lipid peroxide's where his cell wall's not working too well. They're starting to rust, so to speak. And remember, I was discussing earlier how the cell wall health determines how does a cell function, basically. So we could see that was a problem. And his inflammation affected him a little bit differently. We could see that the copper was high, which that can be very damaging to the nervous system, and the zinc was low. So we could see some mineral imbalances. So we wanted to make sure that we address those things, start getting, even though copper is necessary, too much of it can be bad. So we just saw a little bit different, and that's where the testing is so important, because we didn't want to go down this pathway because it would have been the wrong path. Even though there was still GI inflammation, there was now an elemental component kind of mixed into his case. And there was also an addiction to food. So again, that was one of those clinical pearls. He really just liked the sandwiches. Didn't even like the stuff on the sandwich, just the sandwiches. So that was one of the first hurdles, is we have to quit eating these things because this child's craving bad stuff. But for some kids, it can be a complete cure, which is, to me, really crazy when they talk about a grain-free diet. And in that grain that he was consuming, that gluten was one of the worst chemicals for the brain. So this is by the CDC and USDA's own numbers. If we just kind of interpose, the red line is how much glyphosate we spray on soy and corn, like high fructose corn syrup, all the additives in foods and things like that, and they spray it on wheat too. But the yellow bars are autism. And so we can see that big change. And like we were talking about earlier, the environment that our children are growing up in is nothing like it used to be, because that stuff wasn't even legal until 1996. So we're starting to just see the beginnings of the throes of that, because now kids are, 22 that were first having it. Now they're starting to have kids. So we're starting to kind of see this second generation of basically this big food experiment that's happening. But, that's basically poison for this child's brain. So we wanted to make sure, instead of taking more pills, let's just add less fuel to a fire. And then for him, there was restraint in the impulse control, emotional instability, a lot of things that we typically see. But chronic digestive complaints, bowel and bladder, staining underwear, the sympathetics were going. And this is where, of course, we want to figure things out, because something we'll never see on a test is there was also some bullying going on at school, because he was a little bit different, and the bullying on the bus would really get his sympathetics going, and those would usually be the days that he would soil himself. And when he would do that, he would just try to lie and act like it didn't happen. And in his world, then it was okay, So we could see kind of a mixing of realities, kind of self-perception in the real world. And so that's where, of course, we wanted to address that. There's no pill that we could have given a kid to make up for there being some jerks on the bus. So it's important that we always understand, not just the gut environment, but the social environment, the outside environment that they're trying to respond and adapt to and be like their peers. So we just wanted to make sure that, again, no stone unturned type of thing. So there was addressing that as well on top of all of this stuff. And, you know, he's a super cool kid. The parents are amazing. And now he's doing really good. So we were able to, again, address some of these things, get the brain thriving. So just a quick recap. I know we kind of covered a lot. There's so much to cover. I just wanted to give some examples of some kind of more maybe common things that we see, and especially when you dig, how you can find some stuff. But really, the effects of inflammation on the brain, if we want a brain to develop, the thing that'll get in the way of that most is inflammation. Where that inflammation is coming from can vary. The effects of gut health on the brain are tremendous, because that's how we're going to get nutrients to the brain. That's where most neurotransmitters are actually made, especially serotonins in the GI tract. There's actually more nerve endings in the gut than inside the brain. And the importance of a neuro exam. So not just trying to look at a kid and actually picking apart different parts of the brain, because then when we start putting it under a microscope, remember, the brain's good at giving illusions. So when we start to pick it apart, we can really see it unfolding, and then and then we can exactly see, you know, is it right here in the brain, or is it right here? Is it right here? Is it right here? Here? And I try to build this little map of how their brain's talking, and then show the parents this map and help them understand it too. But diet's going to be big on the brain as well. Usually the food that a child is craving is the worst one for them. And from a very basic standpoint, I just say, if it's in a box or a bag, it's bad for you. If it says it's good for you, it's bad for you. Just eat real whole food. Try to keep it simple. That's the one thing we were designed to eat, was whole foods that we could either grow from the ground or kill. That was really it. That's all we were given. And then the role of brain-based exercises. We want to do the right amount at the right time in the right order. So that way we're not, I use the analogy running on a sprained ankle. We're not going out to play before it's healed, because then we're just going to make things worse. And that's one of the last things we want to do, is create a bigger imbalance in an already imbalanced brain. So kind of recapping, I hope everyone can see how the right testing gets the right answers. Typically, one of the things I hear the most is, I've tried everything. And my first thought is kind of challenge accepted. But then I just think, well, we're probably asking the wrong questions, because we're not getting answers. Because, you know, if a parent's looking for answers, there's obviously something going on, and it's not this big medical mystery. They're just kind of looking in the wrong areas. Knowing what you're doing with these test results is big, and knowing what you're doing with the brain is even bigger. To me, that's kind of fast becoming my first love, is brain function. And the right partnership, because we have to, with what we do, we have to partner with the parents, with the children. I try to do the complete opposite of the way most children are treated in the doctor's office. I'm a hugger for life, but they don't get shots. I'm not trying to poke and prod at them. But we want to make sure we partner. That way everyone's on the same page and we all move forward in sync and together. And to me, these are the blending of both is where we see the best effects. Whenever I really love to train doctors, and I always tell them a new generation of disease requires a new generation of clinicians. We have to think of things in a completely different manner now. And to me, I find the best marriage between functional medicine and functional neurology. Because when we get to the bottom of things metabolically and retrain the brain and get it working again, by far and none, it's the most cost-effective approach over the life of a child. It gets to the root cause, which, again, that's kind of back to Exhibit A type thing. Because if we're getting rid of these infections, if we're getting rid of these sources of inflammation and chemicals, and we're getting the brain talking again, then really the body's just going to thrive. It's highly actionable, too. I mean, sometimes we can start seeing plasticity or the brain changing like right there in the office. I love it every time. Like, gives me goosebumps. But I think the neuro rehab is very necessary. I see that component is usually ignored, and that's okay. Some people know what functional medicine is, but for most people, that's the black sheep of the family. And I say if functional medicine is the black sheep, functional neurology is the purple sheep. It's way out there. but it's really super cost effective. For the neural rehab, it doesn't take a lot of these super fancy brain things. I mean, a tuning fork, balance beams. It can be, you know, tape on the floor. Sometimes we get very creative, spinny chairs. And to me, I love this actually the most, is we're actually healing a child instead of suppressing their function with drugs. Because whenever we start them on that path early, unfortunately, usually they become dependent on that process because we've never actually got to the bottom of it. So they just keep moving forward with that same dysfunction. And as a fractal, that actually starts to grow more and more in their life. And we just kind of, well, I see a little bit more and more of a diminishment in who that person can develop to be.
If I could add something to that.
Oh, yeah.
If you can go back to that previous slide, it's worth noting that, you know, there's two options when it comes to a brain. You can numb it and turn it to mush, or you can develop it and turn it into something beautiful. And so there's literally a fork in the road that parents have to take, but they don't even know there's a fork in the road. That's the problem, is they don't even know that that fork exists because the path has only been paved for you down the path that turns you to mush. Okay, because that's just the reality of the world that we live in, right? And if you don't believe me, just look around you. It's happening all around you, right? The thing is, the problem with our healthcare system is that we try to make million and billion-dollar pieces of equipment, but you already own that billion-dollar piece of equipment. You own something that is self-creating and self-healing and is in a constant state of dying and replacing itself your entire life. Will take 100,000 beats of your heart to keep you alive today. You'll breathe 23,000 breaths today. And somehow we've created a system where we blame the body for the problem. I mean, could you imagine that? Right? Could you imagine that there was a car that somehow like it just grew up out of dirt from the earth, was self-healing, was self-replicating, okay? And if somebody drove that car into me, would I ever blame that car for causing the problem? Never in a million years. So the reason that this is happening right now, and this is the reason why marketing is such a huge expense for pharmaceutical companies, because it costs billions and billions and billions of dollars to swim up this stream of what your heart knows is true, what your mind knows it's true, unless it's mush, right? So that's what marketing is all about, getting inside your brain, inside your mind, because that's the most powerful thing that you own. Okay, so companies will spend billions of dollars trying to market to your children. They'll spend billions of dollars trying to market to you to convince you to go down the wrong path. Okay, and so the system is it's designed that way. You know, it's designed for you, the easiest path to be the most profitable path and the most challenging path that you will face, but you don't know that until you get there. It's a smooth road, but it's taking you somewhere you don't want to go. So, you know, the reason I talk about this, in my opinion, so passionately is because I see what the potential is in each person that we encounter, in each child that we encounter. And I know that, you know, there's so much potential in each and every one of you, just people watching this right now. And everyone's hungry for this information, right? Everyone wants this information. That's why, you know, over 100 people are on this right now for an hour when you could be anywhere else, because you're hungry for this information. The rarest of the rarest. So if you think it's if you think it's hard to find a good functional medicine doctor, because I see that coming in the chat, people are like, I can't find one. The good news is that the beautiful thing about all of this is that it can all be done remotely. So Dr. Jared can work with you pretty much anywhere in the United States and Canada, because a lot of this can be done through video. We can do an eye exam through your videos. We can do a functional neurology exam, you know, because we don't need the equipment. You are the equipment. We're just going to test it. We know where to push and we know where to pull to test the equipment. And so somebody who understands the neurological system like this can assess it very, very rapidly and very accurately. And so if you think it's hard to find a functional medicine practitioner, it is almost impossible to find a functional medicine practitioner that knows functional neurology. And it was really fascinating to me because I actually met some people who were functional neurologists who I hold in the highest regard, in our profession that didn't know functional medicine. And I was like, oh my God, I was like scratching my head. I'm like, how do you not know functional medicine? So the two are just naturally married together, right? Because this taps into the circuitry of the body, and functional medicine taps into the chemistry of the body. And when you can get those two things aligned, like the capabilities that you can unleash in an individual, this is, I forget about just getting people to baseline. Like you can take people to a whole new level with this information, right? So even if you're healthy and you're watching this, like you should want this for yourself, right? We wanted it for ourselves. This is why I changed my entire profession. I changed my wife's profession. Well, she chose to change her profession, right? Everyone on our team actually wasn't planning on becoming functional medicine practitioners. That was not like on our agenda, but we were so passionate about this, and we see so much potential in every human being that we encounter, that this has become like our goal, is to get this in front of as many people who want it. You know, there's lots of people that don't want you to have this information, right? Anyone who's investing in building $1 billion hospital in your city is not interested in you having this information. Anyone who's invested in building a nursing home for you is not interested in you having this information. So the way our economy is set up is that people will profit, you know, off of you not taking action or taking the wrong action. So knowing this is like, there's nothing on the planet that's more cost effective than utilizing your body as a tool to heal. Right? There's nothing more cost effective than that. And we're going to get to the root cause of the problem. We're going to get to the chemical cause of the problem, the biological cause of the problem, the environmental cause of the problem. All of those things are going to be addressed. So the beautiful thing about this process is it helps the entire family. It doesn't just help one person. If I were to create a magic pill, even if that magic pill worked, it would only work on the person who took the pill. You wouldn't get a benefit. If your son was taking a pill through this process, the entire family benefits. So that's the other thing, is that this process scales so nicely within your family. Everyone benefits from the process. It's highly actionable. Anyone can do it. The rehab is what lights up the brain, right? Where we send flow is where we send function. So if I want to activate certain parts of the brain, I can do certain activities to send blood flow and build connections between the body and the rest of the brain with that part of the brain. And then the idea here is to create a beautiful child, not to create a child that's average or numb or is unresponsive to its environment. It's to create a beautiful child. I mean, there's so much capability in the children that you have that it breaks our heart knowing that a lot of parents don't know what we know. You know, like my health is I wish my parents knew what I knew now, what I know now. And I know, I'm sure every parent would feel this way. And so we've made it our mission to try to get as many people access to this as possible. So I appreciate all of you for tuning in. And I just wanted to do this slide justice because Jared's very humble, and you know, he won't say it, but he's an absolutely brilliant human being. So definitely like pay attention, because we're going to make a very, very special offer for you right now so that we can actually help you, right? This is really about ultimately helping you.
Yeah, absolutely. And a little bit more about functional neurology. This actually happened in the office. So this was something called a retained primitive reflex, which as the front of the brain develops, it inhibits a lot of these reflexes that keeps the baby alive before they can think and plan and do all this stuff. So we told this 7-year-old, draw a star. That was the before picture up at the top. Then I noticed the way he was holding his pen, so then we did some work on him. After one treatment, we could see 2 triangles, like superimposed a little bit on each other. So then we did it again, and then we can actually see those 4-pointed stars. And that was like 1.5 minutes. So, and it was real funny because the mom was like, oh, wow, what's the treatment? What do we do? And I was like, you just saw it. Like, that's what we do. And we just do this, 3 times a day for a couple minutes a day. And we'll just keep doing this until we don't see the fist grip in the pen anymore. And so then we know that connection's been made in the brain, and we've seen kind of suppression of this lower part to allow the front to go. So Dr. Patel was talking earlier. I have a lot of training in this, and I always think I can always have more, which to me is, I always love to stay hungry. I think I've been to most seminars probably 2 to 3 times now. I just keep going to the same ones over and over because I haven't found new ones yet, because I just go to them all. gut function is really where it started for me for everything, because we was told that we would never have our daughter. And so I remember you told me to fix Julie's gut, and that's us right there. And we found some stuff that shouldn't have been there. And she had her first cycle. She hadn't had one in 5 years, and then she had it that very next month. So to me, that was a testament of how the body can heal. And then I started to learn a lot about the immune system, because I learned after my wife got pregnant that both me and her are autoimmune. So I wanted to get on the ball to see what can I do to keep my daughter from developing autoimmune disease. Well, I didn't know if I was going to have a son or daughter then. What can we do? So that way it's just the least likely scenario. And then I really started to fall in love with the brain about almost 4 years ago now. And just once I saw what could be possible, it's to me like the coolest feeling, like goosebumps. Everyone gets goosebumps type thing. I love to train other doctors. That's where I see the biggest impact. I've had some local pediatricians. Basically, they just send me their tough cases. They know that the system isn't equipped to deal with them, so they know that they can't serve them. And it's a marriage too. I like working with these pediatricians because they do things that I don't do, and I do things they don't do. But the end result is we're both after just children improving and reaching their potential. And I wouldn't have anyone do anything that I wouldn't be willing to do or am already doing to protect and nurture the health of my family and daughter. So there's just a hard line in the sand. There's certain things I'll never do, eat, put in their mouth, chemicals, things like that. And there's things that we do day in and day out. So my daughter doesn't know it, but she gets eye movements all the time. It's just, jokes on her. So she doesn't know that I'm doing predictive saccades. Yeah, but again, we can really see Thrive, where I like a lot of, usually when I see a lot of families, they're in survival mode. I like them to be in thrive mode. We're just really seeing everybody working lockstep